Hey y'all, let's take a look at Mark chapter 8 in this unusual healing of a blind man. So 8:22. And they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see people, but they look like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, "Do not even enter the village." And Jesus went on with the disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they told him, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets." And he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Christ." And he strictly charged them to tell no one about him. So this healing is an unusual healing, and it opens up a very important sequence in the Gospel of Mark. It's this central sequence in the Gospel of Mark where Jesus is journeying from the region of Galilee to Jerusalem. If you'll notice, Mark doesn't record any other journeys of Jesus to Jerusalem. This is the only journey, so it's the journey to the cross. It's the journey where he will go to be crucified. And so it's a very crucial turning point in the gospel. And this whole central section is framed by stories of, or bookended on either end, by stories of Jesus healing a blind person. And this is significant because it's commenting not only on those individuals' blindness, but the disciples' blindness. Remember, Jesus' miracles are always signs. They're kind of like parables. And in this case, the blindness that Jesus is healing is not just the physical blindness of these men, but it's the blindness of the disciples themselves. And ultimately, it's a blindness that comes from the fact that they cannot understand Jesus without the cross. So let's look just at this incident of the healing and then comment on what it is they can't see. So Jesus heals this man in two steps. And it's a really unusual healing because in most cases, Jesus heals immediately. In fact, later on, at the end, he will heal a man spontaneously. And in this case, he heals a man, and it takes two stages. Why is that? What's going on here? Well, I think it's important to note that the immediately following story is about Peter's confession of Christ. So the man, Jesus says, "Do you see?" And he says, "Well, I see people, but they don't look fully right. They look like trees walking." Well, what goes on in this story? Jesus asks the question, "Who do people say that I am?" And they name various responses. And then he says, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter says, "You are the Christ." Now, he's right, but he's not entirely right. He sees Jesus, but he's like a walking tree. He sees part of Jesus. He thinks Jesus is the Messiah, and he's right. But he doesn't come to the full confession that will only come in the Gospel of Mark at the end by a Roman centurion at the foot of the cross who says, "This man was the Son of God." So Peter sees Jesus, but he doesn't see him fully. And just like the man who got a partial healing of his sight, Peter and the rest of the disciples, they partially see Jesus. He's a tree walking. He's the Messiah, but they don't know that the Messiah is the Son of God. They don't yet have the full picture of who Jesus is. And you can see how all of this unfolds because in the central section that I've just been talking about between these two healings of blind men, there's this pattern that will emerge. Jesus will say, "I'm going to Jerusalem to be rejected, to suffer, and to die, and on the third day rise." And following that revelation, the disciples will do something stupid, like fight over who's the greatest, or somehow misunderstand Jesus' mission. And then Jesus will teach what it means to really follow him. So the healing that needs to go on, or the healing of sight that needs to go on, is a revelation of what Messiah would be. That he would be a suffering Messiah, that he would be the suffering servant of Isaiah, that he would lay down his life, that he would conquer through weakness and humility, not through power and force. And the reason the disciples need to be healed is they're learning that to follow such a Messiah means they have to follow in the same way. And it's going to take some doing. It's going to take, in fact, the cross and the revelation of the cross and what that means to Jesus and what that means for followers of Jesus. So ultimately, the central section, the big theme is who really is Jesus and what does it really mean to follow him? And we need our eyes opened by the cross in order to see him not just as a good man, not just as a prophet, not just as wise, but as the Son of God who died for the sins of the world and who calls us to follow him in the same path of emptying and service only to be raised up by God. So may Jesus himself open our eyes to see who he is through the cross and in his resurrection. Amen.